This is wrestling's greatest moments.
Hey now, wrestling fans. It's time for another episode of Wrestling's Greatest Moments. Sit back as Wrestling's Greatest Moments looks at wrestling battle royals, from medieval mayhem to the Royal Rumble. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single video. Wrestling battle royals, as we know them, date back to the 1930s. However, as we'll see, the concept behind the battle royal dates back centuries to the medieval era. The concept of a small army of combatants engaged in a free-for-all continues to entertain and evolve. But how did wrestling promoters tap into the idea? The medieval melee. Some wrestling historians claim the battle royal's origins date back to the medieval melee. If you've ever watched a movie about the Middle Ages or a fantasy world set in a similar environment, you've seen tournaments where knights battle one another, either one-on-one or in groups. According to medievalist.net, tournaments were popular events all over Europe, evolving from training for war to an opportunity for young men to prove their worth on an international scene. The medieval tournament is often associated with knights on horseback jousting for supremacy. Another event, and one which arguably can be linked with pro wrestling battle royals, was the melee. Natalie Anderson describes how, in its earliest incarnation, the tournament served primarily as training for war and usually took the form of a large melee, where combatants would engage in group combat, either on horseback or on foot. And while the swords might be blunted, the equipment was not far removed from that used in real warfare, and the injuries sustained could reflect that. These tournaments also reinforced cultural beliefs, such as the code of chivalry. In addition, they were not only entertainment, they brought honor, prestige, and social capital to organizers and competitors alike. By the later Middle Ages, tournaments could be very expensive, but organizers clearly thought that the money was well spent. Tournaments and melees are examples of spectator events where a crowd can indulge in violence or simulated violence. While this video won't explore the concept of blood sport and humanity's fascination with it, books such as Dr. Garrett G. Fagan's The Lure of the Arena, Social Psychology, and The Crowd at the Roman Games provide a deep look into this phenomenon and how it continues in contemporary society. Medieval scholars have uncovered how extensive tournaments became and how organizers eventually developed detailed rules for the events. It's not surprising that tournaments in the Middle Ages were often organized haphazardly. It's assumed that any rules were only agreed upon once the participants had gathered. However, by the 15th century, we can see attempts to make a more standard set of regulations. This can be seen in the Tournament Regulations of Bamberg, 1478. The parallels between the melee and pro wrestling battle royals are notable, including safeguards to protect combatants, using them to reinforce cultural norms, and of course, to entertain. Unfortunately, wrestling battle royals were also preceded by some disturbing and disgusting practices. The battle royal enters the English language. The concept of the melee continued, but took on a different form as the term battle royal came into use. Interestingly, the term battle royal may have begun initially with cockfighting. An article at the website Stack Exchange traces the origins of the term battle royal, noting, "A search of early English books online yields 3 instances of battle royal earlier than the 1672 instance cited in the phrases.org discussion and in Claren's answer, and 2 of those 3 instances explicitly involve cockfighting. The instances occur in books published in 1655, 1662, and 1671. The battle royal as we know it began to take shape in 18th century England when a group of boxers competed in a winner-take-all competition. The rules of boxing were much different then, with boxers allowed to use wrestling holds as well as gouges and other moves banned today. As John S. Nash writes in Wrestling with the Past, The Bizarre Origins of the Battle Royal, Part 1, battle royals can be found in advertisements dating back to the early 1700s. While these were classified as boxing events, Nash notes, ironically, the fact that they were boxing matches made them resemble professional wrestling even more so, for boxing was a very different sport in those days. As the late Harry Mullen described in his Ultimate Encyclopedia of Boxing, not only was fisticuffs permitted in this earlier version of the sport, but also wrestling was accepted as a proper part of boxing, and so were blatant fouls such as gouging. Nash explains that famous boxer Jack Broughton developed a set of boxing rules that resembles contemporary boxing. As such, these contests and others that followed were most likely held under the new Broughton's rules that went on to forbid attacks below the waist and ground fighting. Over time, the battle royals were viewed as crude and were phased out. However, they found a new home in the colonies. Battle royals became common in the antebellum South, where enslaved persons were often thrown into events known as free-for-alls. Following the Civil War, these contests continued with African Americans battling each other for a small prize. White competitors occasionally fought in them, but according to an article at the Jim Crow Museum, people of color typically competed in them. The events were dangerous, and even more so when organizers had entrants compete blindfolded or even with an arm tied behind their back. Pro wrestling promoters take notice. Battle royals were eventually phased out in boxing, but pro wrestling promoters saw their value. As Wrestling's Greatest Moments has explored, pinning down a first in wrestling is problematic. However, MMA writer John S. Nash writes, "Two of the earliest promoters to hold such a battle royal were Johnny McGee, whose territory was based in Maine and the Northeast, and Herb Owen, who operated out of Oregon and the Northwest." According to Nash's research, the rules for Herb Owen's contest were as follows: the 6 mat men and the referee entering the ring at the same time, battling until only 2 remained standing without shoulders pinned to the mat, and the finalists meeting in a 30-minute one-fall tilt for the attractive purse. What we do know is that battle royals became a special attraction. They were often used as a main event, and sometimes featured top names in the wrestling game. While titles would occasionally be on the line, most battle royals focused on the winner receiving a kayfabe prize, such as money. In other cases, a wrestler might win a new car. While battle royals could be used as a main event, wrestling historian, booker, and manager Jim Cornette said they also worked for promoters trying to work on a small budget. During an episode of his podcast, Cornette notes promoters could book a tag team match and 2 or 3 singles matches, which utilized 8 to 10 wrestlers. Then they could book a battle royal using the same wrestlers without paying them twice. The Cow Palace Battle Royal. Not all battle royals were a cost-cutting trick. In 1967, Roy Shire launched a yearly battle royal in his NWA San Francisco promotion that quickly became one of wrestling's hottest shows of the year. The battle royals became known as the Cow Palace Battle Royal, named after the Cow Palace, a venue where they took place. In 2015, Jim Ross looked back at the event's importance. One of the things that San Francisco wrestling was known for was its annual Battle Royal, which became an eagerly anticipated event for wrestling fans every January. It started as a modestly attended event in the Cow Palace on November 11, 1967. But by 1969, the annual Battle Royal was selling out of the famous facility, packing it with 16,000-plus fans and oftentimes turning hundreds of others away. Much like the Super Bowl, which took until Super Bowl III to formally establish itself, it also took 3 years for the annual Battle Royal concept to become established as a must-see attraction. Wes Mulholland writes at Kayfabe Memories how promoter Roy Shire hyped the match. The rules were simple, or at least they were in the way they were explained to us fans. Each wrestler put up $500 for a total of $9,000, and the promoter Roy Shire puts up the additional money. The Cow Palace Battle Royal wasn't held in 1970 or 1971, but it became an annual event thereafter. The Battle Royals were hyped all year and treated as a dangerous match. Jim Cornette talks of how the match was used to further storylines, including wrestlers getting injured in the bout and wrestlers turning on tag team partners to win the prize money. While many of the event's wrestlers were wrestlers from NWA San Francisco, such as Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens, outsiders such as Andre the Giant also won, making the matches unpredictable. While the Cow Palace Battle Royal ended when NWA San Francisco went out of business in 1981, Battle Royals were still going strong. While they weren't common, promoters knew fans liked to see them and kept them fresh by limiting how often they ran them. Wrestling promoters devised new stipulations for battle royals, much as they did with traditional matches. For example, promotions held tag team battle royals where tag teams competed, either with one or both members having to be eliminated. Another interesting take on the battle royal was the anything goes or come as you are battle royal. This featured wrestlers entering the ring in street clothes and occasionally bringing weapons. Wrestler Leaping Lanny Poffo capitalized on this, wearing a suit of armor to the ring. Unfortunately, it was an idea that seemed like a great idea, but never panned out in the ring. One of the oddest variations of the Battle Royal was the First Blood Battle Royal, where wrestlers had to bloody an opponent to eliminate them. WWF and NFL fans may remember WrestleMania 2's WWF vs. NFL Battle Royal, which featured some of the WWF's biggest against pro football's baddest. Andre the Giant emerged victorious that night, a frequent occurrence whenever the eighth wonder of the world entered battle royals. While some traditionalists frowned on the idea of championships being at stake in a battle royal, this is no new invention. When used sparingly, it can add to a Battle Royale's drama and create the idea that anyone has a chance at winning the title, a concept later explored in the WWF's Royal Rumble. The road to the Royal Rumble. The WWF's expansion in the mid-80s featured many productions, including the WWF, using Battle Royals to energize their box office. However, Booker Dusty Rhodes decided to try a new concept to brand the Battle Royal into something special. The result was the Bunkhouse Stampede match. Dusty designed the match to appeal to Jim Crockett Promotions' audience, who favored a more traditional wrestling style than the WWF's cartoonish one. This traditional style focused on longer matches, violence, and technical wrestling. Brian James O'Connell sums up the match's appeal to JCP's fans. Heel wrestlers were encouraged to use the weapons in the ring that usually got them disqualified, and babyface wrestlers got to show how tough they could be by evening the odds with steel-toed cowboy boots, leather straps, and trash can lids. For the predominantly southern, blue-collar fan base, the Bunkhouse Stampede was a tough guy free-for-all that ended with their favorite champion bloodied, exhausted, and victorious. 1985's Bunkhouse Stampedes led to Dusty Rhodes winning the series, cementing his unofficial title as the Bull of the Woods. However, Dusty's subsequent wins in 1986 and 1987 had fans wondering if the American Dream created the event to put himself over at the expense of JCP's other wrestlers. The Rumble ruins the Bunkhouse Stampede. By 1988, Jim Crockett Promotions needed all the help it could get. While the promotion still featured a world-class roster, the WWF pulverized JCP's flagship event, Starrcade, by running its Survivor Series pay-per-view against it. As noted in our video, The Story of Survivor Series, WWF told, some might say threatened, pay-per-view companies if they wanted WrestleMania 4, they had to take Survivor Series, and they couldn't take Starrcade. As a result, Jim Crockett Promotions lost the money it was counting on to pay for its large roster and other expenses. Enter Dusty Rhodes to the rescue. Stardust suggested that Crockett run a Bunkhouse Stampede pay-per-view to replenish the promotion's coffers. Dusty booked feature 8 of JCP's toughest hombres, naturally including himself in a steel cage, with the only way to win was by throwing your opponent out of the door or over the top of the cage. Sadly, there was no trampoline in the ring to provide an assist. As Alexander Dumas once quipped, nothing succeeds like success, something evident by the WWF's value as a proven commodity in 1988. WrestleMania 3's success added to the WWF's other triumphs, including house show revenue, a mountain of merchandise, including home video, and WWF spread to network television, including Saturday night's main event and in 1988, the primetime special, The Main Event. The WWF was in high demand, which led to it working with the USA Network on a TV special. Coincidentally, the show would air the same night as the Bunkhouse Stampede. Jim Ross recalls the events leading up to the Royal Rumble. It only got worse 2 months later, when Crockett attempted his second pay-per-view, the Bunkhouse Stampede. This time, McMahon partnered with USA Network, the home of WWF's primetime wrestling show, to air a free special called the Royal Rumble. Again, on the same day. That move not only hurt Crockett financially, but the cable companies as well. Those companies missed out on their share of pay-per-view revenue due to a free special that netted them nothing. As Tim Hornbaker writes in The Death of the Territories, despite his huge advantage in the wrestling war, McMahon refused to let up on his foes, and JCP had to fight for every gain. Crockett planned for his first shot at a national pay-per-view audience on January 24, 1988, with the Bunkhouse Stampede final from the Nassau Coliseum in Uniondale, New York. McMahon reacted by scheduling a Royal Rumble that same night, presented live on the USA Network. What Vince McMahon later described as ruthless aggression saw him seize every opportunity to weaken his competition. As Tim Hornbaker posits, while he, McMahon, might not have been able to deter JCP loyalists from ordering the pay-per-view, McMahon might have convinced some middle-of-the-road fans to watch a free program on cable instead of coughing up money for one. Crockett still garnered a 3.5 buy rate and roughly 200,000 homes, giving him a nice victory. In an interesting twist, Vince McMahon's right-hand man, Pat Patterson, helped him develop the idea for the Rumble. Patterson had wrestled in the Cow Palace Battle Royals and suggested the WWF try a twist on the idea. Patterson recalls how he pitched the idea of the Royal Rumble to Vince McMahon. The difference between WWE's Royal Rumble and a traditional over-the-top rope battle royal is that the participants come into the match at 2-minute intervals, not all at the same time at the beginning of the match. I wanted to create something special, something just like we had in San Francisco, where it had been such a hot event. The more I kept running the idea over in my mind, the more it took shape, and I was sure I was onto something. I felt it. Every instinct in my body told me it would work. McMahon wasn't impressed with the concept, according to Patterson. So I finally brought the idea to Vince. He laughed at the concept at first, saying that an hour was way too long to keep fans interested. I didn't get upset. I knew sometimes he needed time for ideas to sink in. But I made sure to say, "All right, but keep it in mind, will you? Because I know this can work." On October 4th, 1987, the WWF held a battle royal based on Patterson's concept. While fans and wrestling pundits have pointed to the low attendance number, 1,976 fans, as a sign of a match failed, it's worth mentioning that WWF shows at St. Louis's Kiel Auditorium had abysmal numbers throughout the year. Consequently, this is hardly evidence that the concept was flawed or that fans rejected it. Although McMahon scoffed at the idea, Pat found a staunch supporter in NBC executive Dick Ebersol. Ebersol, who had worked with the WWF to create Saturday night's main event on NBC, listened to Patterson's pitch. Ebersol was present because he was also producing USA Network's WWF special. Naturally, everyone wanted it to be another hit, and according to Pat, it was then when Vince McMahon said, "Pat, tell Dick about your stupid idea for that battle royal." Ebersol loved the concept right away. He immediately imagined the drama of the clock ticking down on screen and the audience's anxious anticipation of who was going to enter the ring next being played out every 2 minutes. Patterson went at it, hammering out the details and concocting the 20-man battle royal, dubbed the Royal Rumble, to separate it from other battle royals. The match would evolve, eventually adding 10 wrestlers, and later giving the winner a world title match at WrestleMania. The bunkhouse goes bust. While McMahon's free show likely impacted the bunkhouse's success, Jim Crockett did itself no favors promoting the event. First, JCP decided to air the show at Long Island's Nassau Coliseum, a traditional WWF market. The event would likely have drawn more than the 6,000 fans who showed up had it been held in the Mid-Atlantic area, where JCP had been based for decades. Second, a printing error on the tickets showed a start time of 8 p.m. when the show actually started at 6:35 p.m. Fans watching on pay-per-view missed out on the show's first 25 minutes, as the event was listed as starting at 7 p.m. The match featured some of Crockett's top stars, many of whom were known for their ability to brawl. The match participants were the wildcard entrant, Dusty Rhodes, along with Arn Anderson, Lex Luger, the Barbarian, Road Warrior Animal, Tully Blanchard, and the Warlord. The match featured lots of brawling and a good amount of blood. It had all the makings of a good battle royal. The problem was that the rule that people had to be ejected over or through the cage was just too hard to pull off. In order to knock your opponent over the cage, you would have to drag them up to the cage and beat them bad enough where you might throw them over the cage. Anyone who took their opponent to the top was putting themselves at risk for elimination. It just didn't seem realistic. A lackluster undercard didn't help. The Bunkhouse Stampede proved to be a disappointing show for fans and a disappointing investment for Jim Crockett Promotions. That doesn't mean that the event was a debacle financially. According to historian Tim Hornbaker, Crockett still garnered a 3.5 buy rate and roughly 200,000 homes, giving him a nice victory. The problem was that the event should, and likely could have done more to bring in some much-needed revenue. The Royal Rumble, by comparison, proved to be a spectacular victory, with the show boasting an 8.1 rating, something unheard of for professional wrestling in the modern era. The Royal Rumble jumped to pay-per-view the following year, quickly becoming one of the most eagerly awaited events in the WWE. More variations of the Battle Royal, including WCW's Battle Bowl and its World War III three-ring Battle Royal that featured 60 competitors. TNA Wrestling's Reverse Battle Royal, while novel, was a disaster to watch. Other Battle Royals include AEW Wrestling's Dynamite Diamond Ring Battle Royal and its Casino Gauntlet Battle Royal. The Royal Rumble is now a WWE fixture. The promotion launched the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal at WrestleMania 30 to honor Andre's legacy as a Battle Royal King. WWE also books Battle Royals to determine #1 contenders and, in some cases, to crown new champions. Battle Royals show no sign of letting up, and fans can expect to see more variations as promoters try to find new ways to tap into their popularity. Do you like Battle Royals? If so, what were your favorite events? Share your thoughts in the comments section and let us know if there are any videos you'd like Wrestling's Greatest Moments to cover. In the meantime, subscribe to our channel, follow us on X and Instagram, and spread the good news about Wrestling's Greatest Moments. the channel that celebrates the squared circle.